So the ATF pistol brace rule faces another lawsuit which seeks to halt the rule in March. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think the ATF's new pistol brace rule is clearly unconstitutional, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Also want to thank a sponsor of this channel, which is USCCA. Through your membership, you get training, education, and self-defense liability protection. So if you carry a firearm, I highly recommend you take a look into USCCA, and I'll leave a link to them down in the details section. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we will be discussing the ATF's new rule on stabilizing braces, which was published on January 31st, and currently there are lawsuits attempting to stop its enforcement. This new pistol brace rule makes it so that almost any pistol with a brace attached will now be considered to be an SBR and therefore subject to the NFA's restrictions. In response to this final rule being published, multiple lawsuits have now been filed against the ATF. The lawsuit we will be focusing on in this video is called Mock v. Garland, and this is an FPC lawsuit. This lawsuit was filed in the Northern District of Texas, and it's a direct challenge to the ATF's new rule on pistol braces. This lawsuit again is led by FPC, and it's before a district court judge, Judge Reed O'Connor, who has already issued multiple favorable decisions against the ATF and their recent rule on frames and receivers. And the lawsuit you may be familiar with that is the Vanderstock v. Garland case. So this is a case that is challenging the pistol brace rule. It's in a federal district court in Texas, and it's before a favorable judge who's already halted the enforcement of the frames and receivers rule. In the mock lawsuit, the plaintiffs and the ATF have agreed and submitted a proposed schedule to have the court hear a motion for preliminary injunction or a preliminary relief in the month of March. And if granted, the injunction can halt the pistol brace rule before it goes into effect after that 120 days. In this lawsuit, FPC is seeking for the final rule to be found invalid under multiple theories. The plaintiff asked for the court to find that the rule is unlawful and for them to also vacate the final rule. They also ask in the alternative for the court here to postpone the effective date of the final rule while this case is currently being decided. In the lawsuit, it's alleged that the final rule on pistol braces actually violates the Administrative Procedures Act in multiple ways. In the first section, FPC argues that the pistol brace rule creates a regulation that is not consistent with the statutory definitions established by Congress in the GCA and NFA. FPC argues that the ATF is attempting to regulate weapons parts that Congress expressly left out of the statute and the definitions, and also here the ATF is trying to impose a criminal felony on various charges for those types of violations. Then in this section, we see FPC point to the recent 5th Circuit en banc panel ruling on bump stocks, and that is the Cargill case. In this section, FPC argues that the 5th Circuit's precedent points this court to not use Chevron deference. FPC states, the traditional tools do not include Chevron deference here, because the statute is unambiguous, and even if it were, the 5th Circuit does not apply Chevron deference to interpretations of statutes carrying criminal penalties. This is important because you see FPC first arguing that the text of the statute is very clear. The term rifle, as seen in the GCA and NFA, do not include and were never intended to actually include pistols with braces attached. So under the plain text and the plain reading of the text of the GCA and NFA, the statute here does not cover pistol braces or firearms with braces attached. But then the argument is that even if the court were to find that there were some sort of ambiguity in the text and some sort of ambiguity in the statute, then Chevron deference should never be used, and it should never be used to determine what was actually intended. Instead, the en banc panel in Cargill illustrated that the rule of lenity should be used instead. If you're not aware of what Chevron deference refers to, Chevron deference is the term coined after the landmark case, referring to the doctrine of judicial deference given to administrative actions like the ATF is trying to claim they're doing here. Generally, for an agency to be given Chevron deference, the agency's interpretation of an ambiguous statute or term must be rational or reasonable. In contrast to Chevron deference, the rule of lenity indicates that when dealing with criminal statutory interpretation, a court is required to apply any unclear or ambiguous law in a way that is most favorable to us, the people, not an enforcement agency like the ATF. The interpretation of the definition of a rifle and SBR does involve criminal penalties, and therefore the argument in this case is that the rule of lenity would actually direct courts to interpret this term or any ambiguity in a way that is in the favor of the people, not the ATF. So FPC is arguing that all Judge Reed O'Connor has to do in this case is follow the process as outlined by the en banc panel in Cargill. Second, FBC argues that the ATF violated the APA by not following the Supreme Court's decision in Heller, Caetano, and Bruin. They state, moreover, the final rule fails to adequately consider the Supreme Court's opinions in Heller, Caetano, and Bruin. In promulgating a final rule that directly impacts constitutionally protected firearms that are in common use, the agencies should have engaged in the court-mandated text and history analysis. Instead, the final rule merely pays lip service to Bruin. They also argue that based on the information and belief, a full review of the record in this case will evidence that the agencies failed to adequately consider comments that demonstrate that the agency's estimate of affected firearms in circulation is drastically low, and thus the agencies fail to adequately consider the full extent of the final rule's effect on the public and the firearms industry writ large. This argument section points to the fact that the pistol brace rule only estimates that there are about 4 to 7 million AR pistols or AK pistols with braces attached to them out in circulation. However, in reality, the true estimate is anywhere between 40 to 100 million in circulation. This rule will clearly impact arms that are in common use for lawful purposes, and also it impacts arms that are not dangerous and unusual. This was a massive failure by the ATF to not properly evaluate the impacts of this rule, and therefore the plaintiffs here, FBC, are arguing that it must be found invalid. Finally, FBC argues purely on Second Amendment grounds, this rule is invalid. They state, because the defendant's final rule uses a nebulous multi-factor test, the agencies could essentially declare any item that could feasibly be attached to a pistol a stabilizing brace, thereby converting the pistol into a rifle under the agency's new definitions. Thus, virtually anyone possessing a handgun in any variety of objects could be charged with constructive possession of an unregistered short-barreled rifle or SBR. Constructive possession without proper NFA registration bears significant fines and prison time, alongside forfeiture of the firearm. In effect, because the final rule operates as a discretionary conversion of some pistols into rifles when possessed with unknown objects, it will chill the exercise of individuals' Second Amendment protected right to own and possess a handgun in the home for self-defense, the direct issue in Heller. So those are the arguments presented by the plaintiff here, FBC, in this case against the ATF and their new rule on pistol braces. Now, recently, FBC and the ATF submitted a proposed briefing schedule to the judge here, Judge Reed O'Connor. They requested that all the papers for a motion for preliminary injunction or some sort of preliminary relief be submitted by March 17th. Therefore, the court can decide whether or not to grant the injunction or to halt the final rule going into effect before that 120-day amnesty is actually up. So that's really important. The goal right now is to get this halted before it fully goes into effect after the 120 days. The judge in this case, Judge Reed O'Connor, has issued very favorable decisions against the ATF and the ATF's new rule on frames and receivers. So I have hope that he will actually rule the same way here because it's similar type of action being taken by the ATF, just a completely different item. He also has been very quick when it comes to issuing decisions and scheduling these types of things. So I suspect maybe he will do the same here. But right now, like I said, the goal of the plaintiffs here with these types of lawsuits is to try to get this halted before it fully goes into effect and before that amnesty period is up by the 120 days. So that is where this pistol brace lawsuit currently stands. But if we get any more information on this case or others, I of course will let you know. Also, if you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm or fuel Algorit's rhythm. It adds fuel to his jet and signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. As always, I want to thank everybody who likes, comments, subscribes, who hits the notification bell, who shares these videos. You guys are directly impacting these videos, impacting this channel, and helping me to reach and educate more people than I could ever do on my own. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.